Okay, so welcome everyone to our webinar, which is titled Environmental Justice and Wellbeing, Improving Energy Access to Empower Women in Rural India. This is the second webinar in our series, which we call GEMS, and GEMS stands for Gender, Equity, Mobility, Sustainability, and these are initiatives from the Global South. So before we get started, I want to review a few housekeeping items. Since this is a webinar, your audio will be muted during the hour. If you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, use the chat function at the bottom of your screen. For any logistical issues, please send a message to Taylor Dorsey. She's our co-host and intern for this project using the chat function. So please, if you haven't already, enter your name in the chat box and your affiliation so we know who you are. So my name is Chrisanne Naransky. I'm a faculty member at the School of Social Work at Adelphi University. I'm honored to be the moderator for today's session. This webinar series is being co-sponsored by the U.S. nonprofit Friends of Kalangarai and Adelphi University School of Social Work. Friends of Kalangarai supports the community-based programs of Kalangarai, which is an NGO that serves widows and abandoned women in South India with community-based programs and microcredit loans, self-help groups, and leadership training, among other things. So this series of 6 webinars features experts leading innovative programs that focus on poverty, women's rights, environmental justice, and socioeconomic development in South Asia. The webinars will focus on the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 5 to achieve gender equality and empower all women. Despite our efforts to educate and economically empower marginalized women in the Global South, there are still extensive work to be done. According to the United Nations report, gender inequities are still deep-rooted in every society. Women suffer from the lack of access to sustainable work and gender wage gaps. Many are denied access to basic education and healthcare and are victims of violence and discrimination. They're also underrepresented in political and economic decision-making processes. So despite these discouraging reports on reaching the SDG goals, there are numerous initiatives like the one today that we'll be talking about, making progress in empowering and mobilizing women and girls. So the fourth gem in this series of webinars is about sustainability. When examining 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, all of them address some aspect of sustainability, namely the dimensions of climate change, water, food, and land, and environmental health. As we move forward with implementing our programs to address gender equity, we will need to think about how we can integrate gender equity and empowerment with all these dimensions of sustainability. They're all very interrelated. And we hope that these webinars will help us all to further our understanding of these complex interactions. So it is my pleasure today to introduce the speaker, Dr. Praveen Kumar. So not only is he a teacher and a researcher, he's also an active board member for Friends of Kalangarai. We're very honored to have him with us, and he contributes a lot to our board. Dr. Kumar is an associate professor of the Boston College School of Social Work, which is my alma mater. Dr. Kumar's research examines economic, social, and behavioral responses to environmental changes that impact the well-being of poor communities in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. His scholarship is at the intersection of environment and development and has 2 interrelated tracks. Number 1 is the impact of clean energy interventions on the well-being of vulnerable and poor households, and 2, economic, social, and behavioral challenges that perpetuate energy poverty. His research is informed by and responds to the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 7, which focuses on modern, clean, and affordable energy, and goal number 13, climate action. So without any further ado, I'd just like to have Dr. Kumar take the Zoom floor. So thank you so much.
Give me just a second. I'm having some trouble again with the technology. Thank you so much, Chrisanne, and thanks so much for having me. And all of you, hello everyone. Thanks so much for taking time today and it could be evening for you, morning, afternoon. So that's great. It's important to actually have these conversations at the intersections of climate, environment, and women's empowerment, particularly because we are very close to what is going to be the COP28, the climate change conference in November in Dubai. Every year, this is the nodal conference that happens, everywhere in November. And we have the leading politicians, the leaders of different countries, the presidents, prime ministers, researchers. They get together for this 2 week long conference. They do talk about all of these issues that Gems and Chrisanne really talked about. And it has been my pleasure to be attending the COP conferences. And this year, so Boston College holds an observer status to the COP conferences, and this year I will be leading the BC delegation to Dubai to attend multiple meetings, particularly the discussions on what US is doing in the global South, and what World Health Organization is doing, and what the other UN systems that are planning to do for the next 1 year. And a whole lot of conversation that I will be doing today will have a flavor to what we will be discussing and observing in the COP conference in November. So let me quickly share my screen, and I hope that it works. So let's see. Um, I assume that you can see the slides in the presenter mode. Okay, great.
Perfect.
Thanks. What I'm going to do, that the plan is that I'm going to present just a few slides, and I'll try to have a bunch of time to have discussions, questions, and so on. So the topic that I selected to actually kind of like discuss today was on environmental justice and how energy access empowers rural women in India, particularly because India is at a cusp of a very interesting transition. It is one of the leading countries among the LMICs, the low and middle income countries, where there is a substantial push towards cleaner energy and renewable energy systems. The government of India has really made some lofty goals and ambitions to harness more and more energy from wind and solar and so on and so forth. So that is very interesting. While all of that conversation is going on, there's also a discussion that what's happening in terms of the energy access amongst the poorest of the poor in the rural interiors of the country. And that's where this dynamics of how energy access can empower women in rural India really cropped up. And that's something that we have been tracking and studying over the past few years. And it's a very interesting topic, particularly if someone is interested in sustainability, environmental justice, and so on. Um, the- Krisan has already discussed about the key areas of my work, so I'm going to quickly scoot over. So the topical areas of my work is in climate and environmental justice and energy access. That's a topical area. I mostly examine interventions that addresses climate and environmental risks amongst the vulnerable communities in the LMICs, particularly Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And in terms of the approaches that I do use multiple approaches ranging from quantitative and qualitative research. However, I have a bias towards system sciences work. So I really look at issues which are more systems wide in nature. So I look at how different social systems, economic subsystems, behavioral, technological subsystems interact with each other, and how they perpetuate issues of climate and environmental justice and cognate research areas. So I use system sciences methods such as social network analysis and community-based system dynamics modeling in my work as well. The first picture is something which is very interesting. This is the one that I took in Glasgow 2 years back in the COP conference. Um, so why are we talking about climate justice and or environmental justice? Most of the times when I do my research on climate change, I actually tend to use the word climate justice more in lieu of climate change. I'll tell you why. Simply because this picture, although it may be old, 2010 or 11, but it really narrates the story and the message that I want to propagate. One is that if you look at the broader, at the country level, those countries who are the largest emitters of the global or the greenhouse emissions, they are projected to have the least impact due to climate change, or rather, let's use the word relatively. So, relatively lesser impact due to global warming. However, the countries who are the least contributors or least contributors to the climate change or global warming, they have actually been at the forefront in terms of at the receiving ends of the climate change impacts. Some of the key sub-Saharan African countries, they are the least contributors to the greenhouse gaseous emissions. However, the countries like Eritrea or Sudan or Democratic Republic of Congo and so on, they are going to be at the receiving end of the maximum impact. And that's why I mentioned that it's not just about climate change. We should really have more conversations on the injustice that climate change propagates. One of the statements that I usually mention is that climate change is inherently racist and it's inherently sexist. That's because it has a disproportionate impact on women and children at the micro level, and it has a disproportionate impact on the poorer countries and the low income countries. So, at every level, from the micro to macro level, there are injustices that are characterized and are connected with climate change. Similar trend goes with environmental justice as well. Uh, they are different concepts. In the US, the definition in and around environmental justice is essentially that we need to really involve communities who are historically marginalized and vulnerable communities in environmental deliberations, in construction of laws and policies and so on, so that the policy implementation that pertains to environment, that should be as equitable as possible. That's what the larger understanding on environmental justice is, and that's the definition what EPA provides to us. They are very different concepts on paper, the climate justice and environmental justice, but you will find that a lot many times in normal parlance, they are used interchangeably simply because the environmental injustices are exacerbated by climate change. Even in the US, you'll find that the brunt of the climate change effects are basically grappled more by historically marginalized communities such as the Black community or in general the BIPOC community. So that's the injustice that I'm talking about. So throughout the presentation, if I talk about environmental justice, consider that, the climate justice is kind of integrated in that. Where do where does women's empowerment really get in? But a couple of years back, I actually wrote a paper published in Special Issue in Sustainability on eco-social work, where I do argue that women's empowerment is very central um, if we really want to achieve climate justice. One of the key arguments in this particular paper that has been cited quite a few times is that there are two important goals amongst the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Goal 13 is on climate action, and Goal 5 is on women's empowerment or gender equality. We cannot achieve Goal 13 on climate action if we do not accomplish the targets and indicators of Goal 5, which is on gender equality. So that's how the interconnections are. And the reasons are essentially because there is a disproportionate impact of climate change on women's health. This was a study that was done by University of Washington Gender and Climate Alliance in 2016, and they reviewed as many as 130 studies on climate and health from 2005 to 2016, almost 10 to 11 years. And they found that the impact of climate it, is actually more on women relative to men, and these were the only two genders that they used for the study. And of course, that is limited by the review of the 130 studies that they did. You'll find that when it comes to the impact on mental health, there are what they found that 69% of the studies reported that it's women who are impacted more by the mental health crisis due to climate change compared to like 21%. Same goes for the food insecurity in a number of cultures in say in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and even here in parts of South America and Americas. It's a common trend that in poor households, women tend to sacrifice their nutritional demands simply to fulfill the needs of the men and children. So that's why when it comes to the impact on food security and nutritional security, 79% of the studies found that it's women again who are impacted more or detrimentally than men. The same goes for death and injury from extreme weather. A few years back, I did a study in Bombay on natural disasters due to climate change and sea level rise. We found that as far as the death and injury is concerned, it's women who pretty much outnumber men when it comes to some sudden natural disasters. Pretty much because, and again, in a number of cultures, it's the prime responsibility of the women is to carry their children, and the attire sometimes in South Asia, women mostly wear saris, and it's very difficult to run or to really kind of escape from a sudden natural disaster. So that also leads to unexpected increase in the number of deaths and injury among women. So. And if you combine all of those studies, 69% of the studies mention that it's women who are at the forefront in terms of the receiving end due to the climate injustices. It's only infectious diseases where men outstrip the number of women. Now, this particular overall review really shows how disproportionate the impact is on climate change on women's health, and that's why I really argued that climate adaptation should really center women in their on their focus. So there are different kinds of adaptation strategies, community education, engagement, early warning systems, afforestation, flood protection. A number of these adaptation strategies I work. The key elements, how I see adaptation, is that it should be locally embedded, it should be community engaged, community responsive, participatory in nature, and of course, it should be as gender responsive as possible. And these are just a few examples of adaptation strategies. I do a lot of work on community engagement and education, and the next few slides basically will provide a case study on community engagement and education. The Souls case study. Uh, we do a lot of work with the Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, which is one of the premier technology and engineering institution in India. And the Souls project is basically about dissemination of solar lamps and solar home systems amongst the below poverty line communities in India. So this entire program included 6 states and 6 million households. And sorry, it's 6 million households across 6 states. And that's one of the objectives, to distribute the solar lamps. And it is a layered kind of a project where there are different kinds of objectives. We wanted to distribute solar lamps because we wanted to have increased um, um, uh, you know retention of poor kids in the schools. So that is one. So that's why you can see the picture over here. And our particular attention was among the girl students in the schools. So that was one of the underlying objectives. The other key objectives of the Souls project was that we wanted to train rural women to become solar entrepreneurs, because one of the key objectives that, or hypothesis that we had, was that if we want to empower women, then we need to provide them with skills. Skills-based training is central to providing women or to really kind of having women empowerment in rural India. This particular project has been funded by multiple organizations, including the Government of India's Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Sir Ratan Tata Trust. Of course, Boston College has been really pulling in some support for doing the research piece. There are a number of other small and medium scale foundations that have been working on this particular project. And what I will be talking about is just a small slice of this particular study. This particular project has been awarded by the Prime Minister of India, the current Prime Minister, a few years back, and there are a whole lot of other things that's also going on in this particular project. So this particular slice that I'll talk about is that the skills-based training for women empowerment and how it really helps in the empowerment of women. So we trained almost like 7,500 women in assembling the solar lamps. So our target was that we are not just going to purchase these 6 million, 7 million solar lamps and distribute it to the poor households. In this entire process, we actually constructed a logistical supply chain where we sourced raw materials from the suppliers to the villages, and then we solicited rural women if they are interested to be trained as assemblers and distributors, as sales personnel, and we trained them in how to really kind of assemble these solar lamps. And these pictures are a prime examples of providing them with training, with skills, and so on. And the underlying objective of all of these training was that over a period of 1 or 1.5 years of training, we would want to see as many of these women to become entrepreneurs. So that was the entire objective. So we trained around 7,500 women, and then out of that, there's of course quite a bit of a dropout. We train them in 3 phases. We train them to become assemblers and distributors, something that you see over here. Then we train them to really do say bookkeeping and sales and so on. And finally, in the third phase, we train them to become entrepreneurs. And then we wanted to see how many of them would actually open solar shops. So we saw that around 800, this is actually a recent data, 800 solar shops were created, and they are functioning really well right now. We wanted to understand that all of these skills that we are imparting and then we are engaging in with women, how does that really relate with the 3 key indicators of women's empowerment: decision making, assertiveness, and satisfaction? By the way, this presentation that I'm doing, this is already published in one of the leading journals, Energy Research and Social Science. The link is provided in the slide below. So we wanted to understand, does it really make a change in their decision making, in their assertiveness and satisfaction? Some of the key measures that we used was uh, what kind of changes it really did on mobility or financial control or decisions on children. Then did they gain assertiveness in sense of price negotiation, public speaking, bargaining capacity, handling disagreements at work, and then satisfaction, like overall well-being, satisfaction with current job, and so on and so forth. Some of the key skills that this program engaged with women, and it was provided, was bookkeeping, how to do soldering, assembly of equipments, record of sales, repair and inventory, and so ability to some of the soft skills like ability to work independently, negotiation skills, and so on. Um, the approach, I'm not going to go that much into details, but very quickly, we did this study in a small section or small slice of the larger training of 7,500 women that we did. We studied around 313 women. It was more of a longitudinal study. So as I said, we provided them in training on A&D, which is assembly and distribution. Then we moved to the second phase of training, repair and maintenance, and then entrepreneurship training. And then we basically wanted to see if they essentially start their own solar shops. We did this study in 4 states: Jharkhand, Bihar, um, Uttar Pradesh, and Assam. Um, what were the key findings? We actually saw that there were remarkable change in the levels of assertiveness over the period of time. One of the key indicators that actually I am more biased towards and I was so stoked about is to see the engagement of women when it comes to public speaking, particularly in front of men. Not sure, so I'm just going to put a quick underlying context over here. We are talking about the rural women in some of the lowest income households and villages in India, where there's a very skewed, or there's a remarkable gender differences. Women tend to speak not a lot in front of men, and particularly in front of gatherings. So it was very encouraging for us to see that out of the skills-based training that we provided, not only their bargaining capacity with the suppliers increased, but also their public speaking capacity um, uh, in front of men improved. And that was something that we, over a period of time, and that's something that we were really, it was very interesting to kind of see that. In terms of the overall satisfaction of life, we saw that there was some wavy kind of a trajectory over here, but overall, they were satisfied with the kind of a training that they received, the improvement of their lives, and then also the futuristic scenario in terms of how their life will be. All of that also generally improved. This particular figure shows that uh, we we when we started the training programs, it was around 7,500 households. This is the latest data. 32% of the participants who started training in this program, they started their own solar shops. This, I would say, is a remarkable achievement, especially for rural poor women who were mostly homemakers. They didn't really have a whole lot of economic opportunities to pursue. 32% is a huge number. And just to kind of add another layer of data, out of these 32%, around 20 to 25% of those solar shops are still functioning. They have started showing signs of being profitable, and they are still led by women in these rural areas. And in fact, uh, they are running, they're working smoothly, and now they have actually hired a couple of more women to run their solar shops. So that's the scenario that we are really kind of talking about. This is clear. This is a clear sign of economic empowerment, cultural empowerment, and social empowerment of women, which is so crucial in the kind of population that we are working in. Just to quickly provide you the comparison in terms of the states, we found that the satisfaction levels were higher in almost all the four states. The decision making were relatively lower in all the four states, particularly in Bihar. But the grand scheme of things, I would really gonna not talk a lot about this particular slide. So, what's the overall insight? The overall insight that I underscore is that skills based training is so crucial. And I know that a lot of members who are connected with the Friends of Kalangarai, they actually would resonate with this statement that skills based training is so important and so crucial and core to improve women empowerment levels and bridge gender disparity, particularly among the vulnerable populations. Um, and if I would really want to, uh, currently I'm also a National Institute for Health, NIH, Climate Change and Health fellow, and I have been advising a couple of NIH agencies, particularly Fogarty International Center, in shaping their climate change and health research agenda, particularly for the low and middle income countries. So there was a lecture that I did, and the link is over here. The slides is going to be with you, and they actually based on my lecture, they wrote a report on in the NIH newsletter that just came out 2 to 3 days back, and that's a link. And they do argue that NIH should devote more and more studies and focus more on women's empowerment in their grand scheme of things on climate change and health. I'm still currently working with them and helping them shape their research agenda on climate and health. So coming back to the skills-based training, even the overall data shows the similar trend. Those countries who have a higher gender inequality, if the gender inequality increases in countries, then the vulnerability also increases. The vulnerability to climate change and vulnerability to environmental injustice increases. On the flip side, if the gender inequality decreases, then the climate action in those communities increase, which is a great sign. So that's the underlying objective. If this is the biggest motivator for me to really work in this area of women empowerment, because this directly connects with climate action. It connects with decreasing the vulnerability of communities to climate change and so on. So I would conclude my slide over here. And I think that the rest of the time we can devote for questions and comments and so on. Thank you. Thank you so much. Over to you, Krisan.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So um, if you have questions, please feel free to raise your electronic hand. You can find that on the toolbar, or just unmute and ask your question, and you can put your questions in the chat. Dr. Kumar, do you want to stop sharing your slide? I can put your email in the chat in case anybody wants, so we can all see each other. Great. Okay, everybody. Now wake up. What questions do you have? Please turn on your cameras so we can have a nice conversation. We have an expert here in gender in the environment, and this is just an opportunity that you don't have every day. So please let us know what's on your mind. Taylor, do you have a question? Go ahead.
Thank you for that presentation. It was very interesting. I was just wondering if you would be able to share the slides with us after, so that I can send it to participants and anyone else who's interested, because I think it's a very interesting topic, especially for MSW students.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I will add that since we're recording it, we will be putting the link on our website, and people can then access it through that too. Okay. Well, I'll start with the question. I was wondering, and first of all, I want to say it was a wonderful presentation. It really resonates with some of the things that I've been studying in India and the environmental justice. So I wondered about dissemination of your program, and if you're doing anything to disseminate it now to like South India, to other groups.
Is it dissemination of the solar lamps that you're interested to
Yeah.
know? Or?
Yeah, the whole program, the skills training and the.
Yeah, so the skills training is a part of this larger program. So this SOULS program has been in existence for the past 10, 11 years now, actually 12 years. And there is a lot of planning that went into before the SOULS was even implemented, because 6 million solar lamp distribution to as many households is not a small kind of a job there. So we planned right from the nodal level, right? When are we going to get the funding, say, from different foundations and organizations? Where are we going to source these materials? Which are those companies and organizations we will collaborate with? And the key institution that we targeted that really helped us in dissemination of these many solar lamps were those public schools in the villages. We targeted the public schools, which are administered and run by the local district authority, and we contacted each of those district authorities and the blocks to help us disseminate these solar lamps. And we we were pretty encouraged by the fact that there are so many district officials who were so excited that this kind of a program were there in the villages. In fact, we had to limit ourselves in terms of dissemination, although we still get a demand from other district officials to roll out these programs in their districts as well. So at every level, we planned, but I would say that the nodal piece was to target the public schools. That's one. And the second aspect was that although we distributed these solar lamps through the schools, there was a very particular awareness building mechanism that we did in the villages, and that was um, uh, implemented by the women, by the rural women. So what we did was we hired these women who, of course, we wanted them to be trained. But even if they show little reluctance in terms of training, we hired them and we called them as solar sisters. And they were our brand ambassadors for disseminating awareness on our solar lamps, on the importance of using solar lamps in the evening in place of, say, kerosene light, and so on, and then why it is so important to use these solar lamps, particularly if you have girl children. We have a paper also published in Energy Research for Social Science, Energy for Sustainable Development, that shows that those households who have solar lamps, the girl child performance in the schools actually improved, because when they had only those kerosene lamp, then that would essentially go to a boy for him to study, and that invariably the girl child will suffer. But with the help of these solar lamps, is the improvement in the performance of the girls that really improved. So we did that kind of a study as well. So I would say the 2 to 3 important piece in terms of dissemination is targeting of the schools, hiring the solar sisters for dissemination, for awareness dissemination, and also hiring them for entrepreneurship training.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So I have a question in the chat from Professor Mandayam. How might such a women's empowerment approach, in conjunction with the focus on climate justice, be translated to poor or vulnerable communities in our backyard in the United States? So we're saying global, local, right?
Yeah, and in fact, deeper to that, that's a great question. So many times we actually take the measures and instruments from the high income countries to LMICs. It's time to actually learn a lot from the LMICs. So that's the deeper layer to it. And I totally echo that. In fact, Google, that's a great question. I would answer that. So at least the SOULS program, what we have done is that there are so many the logistical planning that we did in terms of each of the different layers and how and when to hire what we call as solar sisters, how to target the public schools, which are the nodal institutions that we should really target, if evidence-based interventions or evidence-based technological interventions have to be disseminated. All of these layered planning is something which is very useful for communities, and particularly the marginalized communities here in the US. That's very crucial. In addition to that, what I have also done is that in my class, and also in some of the the local communities that I work over here, I have had Zoom calls from those solar sisters in India to actually discuss their learnings and their experiences to folks over here. So there are so many undergraduate students who I have sent to India to get exposed to work in the SOULS program. But in my class, and there are so many research assistants over here who and even in my class in climate and environmental justice, I have had these solar sisters do a 2-hour Zoom lecture here to help our students learn, who are the next generation of scholars and practitioners, right? And who will be taking all of these lessons in the communities over here, and then of course engaging them with the discussions over here with the community. So these are the 2 endeavors that I have taken, and I have been a translator in those lectures.
Thank you. That's wonderful work. I'm sure you don't sleep ever. Okay, so any more questions in the chat or anybody? Oh, okay. Dr. Cohen, go ahead. You have to unmute.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kumar. This was a fantastic, really exciting presentation. And I know many of us take it as a model of development and so on. I'm particularly thinking about the Solar Sisters. And you may have mentioned that in the information, but as someone who's interested in community development and group work, I'm curious to hear a little bit more about the bond among them. We were talking about empowerment, and I wasn't sure if I got that there was an ownership as well as empowerment, and whether or not they have spun off subsidiary businesses and that sort of thing. So just the direct impact on the participants, which of course, have an impact is what I saw in Bangladesh and in India, through by observing this next door or being part of it, or even being hired by these organizations, can lead to then becoming an owner of initiatives and so on as well.
That's a great question, Dr. Cohen. So in one of the states called Bihar, and this is an example, there are a few villages in one of the districts in Bihar that we have been working in. We recruited the Solar Sisters to disseminate the awareness of the SOLS program, and then a few of them were also interested in the training of in the entrepreneurship training. Over a period of like 2 to 3 years, of course, the work of the Solar Sisters was to disseminate the awareness of the solar program, and then a few of them started their own solar shops. We did what is called as a qualitative network study to understand that whether there is a turbocharger effect
Oh, wow.
of the other women members where we did not really intervene, whether they are getting influenced with the Solar Sisters in the nearby villages or in the neighborhood villages. What we have observed is that there are more number of solar shops coming in those villages where we have not intervened, simply because they get influenced that, hey, these Solar Sisters, they are so confident, so knowledgeable, and they have started these solar shops. So there is a positive network effect, which is to your question on bonding, which is a positive network effect that's going on in here, where one individual has become, like the Solar Sisters, they have become opinion leaders or opinion shapers in terms of how to live sustainably, how to have economic and social empowerment, and they have been influencing women in the other villages where we have not really intervened. So that's the network effect, that's the turbocharger effect that we have observed. And in fact, this is another piece that I would want to mention. There are so many women who have actually gotten to that confidence level that they are now contesting elections in the local self-government. We usually call that as a Gram Panchayat, which is a local self-government in the village. And that's like the action research outcome right there. You
Yeah.
see, and does that answer your question? Or I think there was another piece.
It's completely. I hope it wasn't things that I missed. So I'm so glad you went into that. That was great. It reminded me a little bit of the a lot of, I think, the early Grameen Bank programs, and the women started charging stations for cell phones.
Yes. Yeah.
So it just really reminds me of that. And in fact, there's a debt to be paid from that, because it then just the fact of cell phone coverage and everything else makes a big difference in all this and so on. But it was the sort of beginning germ of this women in technology, I think.
So that's great that you're actually giving an example of Grameen Bank and the self-help groups. So let me add another layer of example in here. So in Rajasthan, we have been doing this program, and there's a city in Rajasthan called Dungarpur, and this program has been so successful in this district called Dungarpur that the different women's groups in the villages who started their solar shops, like small boutique shops, they came together, they registered a company, and the self-help groups, the next level of the self-help groups coming together is what's called federations. So different self-help groups came together, they registered a federation, and then that federation registered a company, and that company is really manufactures, not only provides services on assembly and distribution, they now manufacture these solar parts and they distribute it to the other villages. And all of these activities are governed, they are owned and operated majorly by women. And this federation and that solar company was the one, when I mentioned that this program is awarded by the Prime Minister, particularly that particular initiative was awarded by the Prime Minister. So that's an example of how really smaller actions really kind of have a turbocharger effect, and they magnify.
Yeah, and how cooperatives really, those type of cooperatives really can make a difference.
Right.
That's just amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thanks for the question.
I have another question from the chat from Charamba. What are some of the barriers that affect women's empowerment from your study? So you talked a lot about the things that were really successful, but what are some of the barriers that were encountered as this study was rolled out and these programs rolled out?
They were both structural and institutional barriers. Institutional barriers included a lack of financing. We wanted to provide more and more entrepreneurship training, but there is a limit to how much we could fund or finance. The demand was quite huge, but the supply is always a function of the funds that we have. So that was an issue. So if you know any funder, then please let me know, and we would want to even expand on that. So that was the institutional barrier. Then the second aspect is the structural barrier. A lot of times what we have observed, and this is particularly characteristic to some of the most uh, rural interior kind of a village, where when the women start showing signs of empowerment, cultural empowerment or social empowerment, we have observed that there are at times when men really be supportive, and then there are some of the times when men uh, tend to really prevent this kind of an endeavor. So we consistently had to engage and interact with men as well, to shape their mental models in terms of what will be the benefits and the return on investment in terms of all of these activities if we engage with their spouses. So that was also a kind of a structural barrier, which is pretty much of a gender-based barrier that we're talking about. In addition to that, of course, in this is more of a behavioral change and behavioral shift that we're talking about. So it of course takes a lot of time. So I think off the top of my head, I think these are the 2 to 3 barriers that we have found.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anybody else have a question? I have a question. So, so you have some of this work was done in groups, right? Not only individuals, but groups. And so I'm wondering, like, when we have done research with our the widows in our self-help groups, you know, they some of them want to do group enterprises, small group enterprises, but some of them are concerned about the group and about everybody in the group pulling their own weight. So we felt that there was a need for a lot of trust building amongst the group. So I'm wondering, like, what do you do for this group-based activities to help in terms of training to help support these women become a strong group, and have you know, responsibilities, mutual responsibility to each other?
A key element of participatory action research is then when we do the kind of CBPR work or intervention work, we need to engage with the communities, particularly when they, and that's a great question, and this is something that we have encountered. So, uh, so the key element is that we need to engage in their stories and need to show how the individual stories are not individual. There are certain common elements of challenges and barriers that exist in all of these households. And those are the challenges and barriers that we really need to discuss in groups to show that how homogenous we are in our life's experiences. And that's something that we did in our work as well. You know, there are some individual level activities in how solar shops and entrepreneurship training entrepreneurs are, and then of course there are some group-based active, you know, groups who started. Uh, uh, the way we engaged with them was to actually demonstrate the 2 to 3 issues that they have been grappling with. We did mention that with these entrepreneurship training, there will be more economic opportunities to your households, and that cuts across all the households. So this is a similar narrative for all of them. Then we also engaged in conversations saying that, you know, if you have girl child, see the situation. If you would not have a solar lamp versus having a solar lamp. So again, that's like a common story in all of these households. So really observing the life experiences of these villages, of these households, trying to draw common lessons and engaging conversation on these common lessons is the first step that really prevents, or rather weakens the barrier of entry. And you know, women members and the communities, they really kind of like feel that, hey, we all are same. We have a homogenous kind of a life. So let's actually get together and work on things. And of course, there needs to be some training in terms of bookkeeping, profit sharing, and so on, investments and so on, and how to really distribute the work and things like that. But of course, that's more of an institutional kind of a training, and that will come later. So these are some of the approaches that we used.
And just I'm sorry, a follow-up question. And what about do you have women from different castes participating? And did you have any were they collaborative together, or did you have any issues with intercaste issues? Yes.
That's a good question. That's a function of the states that we intervened. So there are a few states which are relatively more progressive when it comes to caste, but there are a few states where the caste barrier is actually the most challenging kind of a barrier. We wanted to navigate around uh, the caste differences, but of course, uh, you know, working in India, some of the times we tend to say that, hey, let us be caste blind in our intervention, and that's one of the mistakes that we do. We need to be conscious that there are caste barriers. We need to be recognizing this aspect that there are caste barriers that we will be having, and that's something that we recognized that there will be challenges to that. For example, there are states where the upper caste women, despite not having that much economic opportunity, would not want to really start this kind of an enterprise, would not even want to do this entrepreneurship trading with folks who are the backward caste or scheduled caste and so on. So that's something that took a bit of a time to engage. However, that is again one of the challenges where we have observed that even the group entrepreneurship, there are quite a bit of a variation. There are certain group undertaking where there are different castes coming together and starting the enterprise. But I would also say that there are some challenges where the castes remain a little away from each other. So of course, these are some structural barriers that will take generations, but we have been really working in dissolving these caste barriers as much as possible.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I guess one more question I have. Sorry. So I just really appreciate your explanation of your measurements and how much thought went into the measurements. So some of them are they self-assessed, like the women are assessing themselves, and some of them also objective, where other people are kind of looking and like keeping track as well. So you have like two different perspectives on some of these indicators.
That's a good question. All of these scales that we have used are standard scales, mostly taken by the DFID, the Department for International Development, UK. So DFID, which is now called UK Aid, is the US aid of the UK. So most of the scales were derived from that. And of course, we did some extensive literature review to understand and take the scales which are most relevant. Most of these scales measurement during our longitudinal study were assessed by women themselves. So it was mostly the self-assessment that the women did. And I think that that is a more potent strategy rather than someone else outside of the community like us really observing and putting the tick mark. You see.
Thank you. Thank you. So I think we need to be wrapping up. I think Taylor has one question. But before we get to her question, I just want to remind you all that there'll be a survey, assessment survey in the chat and also send out to you. So if you please don't mind filling out the survey, it would be really helpful. Actually, it's one of Taylor's projects for her MSW internship. And so she's using this data to kind of inform future seminars. So we really would appreciate you to fill it out. So our next webinar will be on November. Sorry, I have it here.
November 16th.
November 16th, yes. And we'll be inviting Dr. Rajeshri Joshi, and she will be speaking about farm women's centrality in climate action in South Asia. Okay, so I just want to get to the last question that Taylor had. I don't want to leave any question on the table. So she asked, have you noticed any changes at the family level in terms of empowerment of the children, particularly girls of the women who participated in the study?
Yeah, I would say there are 2 to 3 things that we observe, particularly amongst girls, and we have published the change, something that I alluded to earlier, improvement in their performance in the schools. So that was a clear indicator that is published and that is documented, and it's fairly cited as well. So that's one. Second, participation of the girls in allied activities, in advocacy activities, particularly the young adults and the teenagers at the village level that we have noticed. And in a number of focus group conversations and qualitative discussions, now we actually have started observing that girls have aspirations as well. A number of times we we observe in the villages that girls would really drop out after, say, 8th grade or 10th grade and so on. But over the past few years, of course, I'm not going to attribute all of this to our souls program, but we have observed that our souls program have had some impact, where now they have aspirations to become entrepreneurs, which is so important, to have their own startups. And there are so many girls who say that I want to be like my mom, because my mom really didn't have a whole lot of opportunity, but still with this training started her own enterprise. I would want to really do a startup as well, and of course go to bigger cities, do some more technical education and things like that. So aspirations is a great you can take all of these aside. Aspirations is the most important indicator to assess empowerment.
Great, thank you. So I just want to end by sharing my screen, but I can't share my screen. I don't know why. Somehow it got. Thank you so much, Dr. Kumar. Your work is really inspiring, and I know this is not just like a 1-year study. It's been a number of years that you've developed this work, and we just really want to uplift it for all the values that you put into the study and the work that's coming out of it. So thank you, and thank you for all the women and children that participate in your programs. Thank you to them also.
Yeah, we are grateful. Thank you so much for having me.
Okay.